405K seizure begins is a phrase that immediately triggers fear, but fear is not where clarity lives. What matters here is not panic, but understanding how rules evolve, how incentives shift, and how systems behave when governments face increasing pressure to control capital flows. The idea that retirement structures, reporting rules, and custodial frameworks could expose physical gold holdings to greater oversight is not new. What is new is the timing, the scale, and the broader monetary environment in which these changes are unfolding. This is not about a single rule or a single agency. It is about how financial systems adapt when debt, demographics, and confidence collide. Retirement accounts were originally designed as long-term savings vehicles, protected from political cycles. Over time, however, they have become deeply integrated into the broader financial system. They are no longer isolated pools of private capital. They are regulated, reported, intermediated, and increasingly visible. Visibility is not inherently dangerous, but visibility combined with stress changes behavior. When governments need information, liquidity, or compliance, they look first to systems that are already organized and documented. Gold occupies an unusual position within this framework. It is tangible, portable, and independent of digital infrastructure. That independence is precisely what gives it value during periods of uncertainty. It is also what makes it difficult to integrate cleanly into highly centralized systems. When physical gold is held within retirement structures, it must pass through custodians, reporting mechanisms, and regulatory definitions. Those mechanisms do not exist to seize assets. They exist to standardize and control frameworks. But control frameworks always carry optionality for expansion. The phrase seizure implies force. In reality, modern systems rarely rely on force. They rely on compliance. Compliance is achieved through rules, incentives, penalties, and access. When rules change, behavior changes. Assets do not need to be confiscated to become constrained. They only need to become harder to move, convert, or utilize without triggering consequences. Understanding this distinction is critical. The risk is not that authorities suddenly arrive to take gold. The risk is that structural changes reduce flexibility at the worst possible moment. Flexibility is the true value of gold. When flexibility is compromised, the asset's function changes, even if ownership technically remains. Retirement accounts operate under a special legal status. They offer tax advantages in exchange for restrictions. Those restrictions are accepted during stable times because the benefits outweigh the costs. During unstable times, the costs become more visible. Required reporting, custodial control, and limited access are manageable when confidence is high. They become constraints when confidence erodes. Gold held inside retirement structures is not the same as gold held directly. It is subject to interpretation, classification, and enforcement. Rule changes do not need to target gold explicitly to affect it. They only need to redefine compliance thresholds, reporting obligations, or permissible custodial arrangements. When this happens, gold's role as an independent asset is diluted. The broader context matters. Governments around the world are facing rising debt servicing costs, slowing growth, and political resistance to austerity. These pressures increase the incentive to keep capital within observable and controllable channels. Retirement accounts represent a significant concentration of capital. They are already regulated, they are already monitored, they are already constrained. This makes them an obvious focus during periods of fiscal stress. None of this implies malicious intent. Systems evolve to meet perceived needs. But evolution often prioritizes stability over individual flexibility. Gold challenges that priority because it offers an exit from purely financial representations of value. That exit becomes less comfortable when systems are under strain. The discussion around rule changes should therefore be framed correctly. It is not about confiscation in the dramatic sense. It is about optionality erosion. Optionality erodes quietly, through paperwork, through definitions, through compliance costs, through friction. Historically, governments have used a range of tools to influence how citizens store and report wealth. These tools rarely appear suddenly. They are phased in. They are justified as modernization, transparency, or harmonization. Each step seems reasonable in isolation. Together, they reshape behavior. Gold has repeatedly been at the center of such transitions because it sits outside digital systems. When systems rely increasingly on digital tracking and centralized settlement, assets that resist those mechanisms attract attention. Attention leads to regulation. Regulation leads to integration. Integration reduces independence. Retirement structures amplify this effect because they already exist within a legal framework that prioritizes compliance over autonomy. Physical gold placed inside that framework must conform to it. That conformity is the trade-off for tax advantages. Understanding that trade-off becomes critical during periods of systemic stress. The current environment is defined by convergence. Monetary policy is constrained. Fiscal policy is stretched. Demographics are unfavorable. Confidence must be maintained through perception management rather than fundamental improvement. In such environments, authorities prioritize predictability. Predictability requires visibility. Gold's unpredictability is not price volatility. It is behavioral independence. It does not rely on promises. It does not generate cash flows. It does not respond to policy guidance. That independence is valuable to individuals and inconvenient to systems under pressure. When rules surrounding retirement accounts evolve, they often do so under the banner of protection. Protection from fraud, protection from mismanagement, protection from volatility. These goals are legitimate, but they also create structures that limit self-directed decision-making. For many, the assumption is that assets held legally cannot be interfered with. History suggests otherwise. Legal frameworks define rights, but they also define constraints. When constraints expand, rights are exercised within narrower boundaries. The key issue is not whether gold will be taken. It is whether gold held within certain structures will retain the characteristics that made it attractive in the first place. If access is delayed, if movement is restricted, if conversion requires approval, if penalties apply, these factors change outcomes without changing ownership on paper. This is why understanding custody matters. Gold held by third parties behaves differently than gold held directly. Gold represented by documentation behaves differently than gold in possession. During stable times, these differences appear trivial. During stress, they become decisive. The phrase seizure begins captures attention because it simplifies a complex process into a dramatic outcome. Reality is more subtle and therefore more dangerous. Subtlety delays response. Delayed response reduces options. History shows that when financial systems undergo adjustment, retirement accounts are rarely immune. Adjustments can include changes in contribution rules, withdrawal penalties, reporting requirements, or asset eligibility. Each adjustment reflects broader priorities. Gold's eligibility within retirement structures has always been conditional. It must meet purity standards. It must be stored with approved custodians. It must be reported. These conditions exist for oversight. Oversight can expand. The idea that rule changes could increase exposure does not require conspiracy. It requires incentives. Incentives arise from fiscal pressure. Fiscal pressure is rising globally. This is observable. Debt levels are high. Interest costs are increasing. Political tolerance for tax increases is limited. These constraints lead policymakers to focus on existing pools of capital. Retirement savings represent deferred consumption. Deferred consumption is tempting during fiscal stress. Even without direct seizure, mechanisms can be introduced that encourage or require certain behaviors. These mechanisms can be framed as protective or prudent. The lesson from history is not to fear change, but to anticipate it. Anticipation allows preparation. Preparation preserves optionality. Optionality is the core benefit of holding gold. Gold's role is not to evade systems, but to balance them. When balance shifts too far toward control, gold becomes more relevant. But relevance depends on how gold is held. Structure matters. For individuals considering gold within retirement accounts, the question is not whether it is allowed. The question is whether it serves the intended purpose under all conditions. Purpose clarity is essential. If the purpose is tax efficiency, one set of trade-offs applies. If the purpose is independence, another applies. Mixing purposes creates confusion. Confusion leads to poor decisions under stress. Clear objectives reduce reactionary behavior. The current narrative around rule changes should therefore prompt reflection rather than fear. Reflection on custody, reflection on access, reflection on the difference between legal ownership and practical control. Practical control matters when systems are stressed. Stress reveals assumptions. Assumptions are often invisible until challenged. Gold has historically functioned as an asset of last resort not because it is illegal to control, but because it is difficult to integrate fully into centralized frameworks without losing its defining characteristics. When integration increases, characteristics change. This does not mean gold loses value. It means its role shifts. Understanding that shift is critical. The broader monetary environment suggests continued experimentation with policy tools. Experimentation often includes rule adjustments. Adjustments affect behavior. Behavior affects markets. Markets react not just to outcomes, but to expectations. Expectations are shaped by narratives. Narratives around seizures reflect underlying anxiety about control and autonomy. That anxiety is not irrational. It emerges during periods when trust in systems weakens. Gold becomes a focal point because it represents an alternative to trust-based systems. The prudent response is not panic buying or hasty selling. It is education, understanding the legal structures involved, understanding custodial arrangements, understanding reporting obligations, understanding how flexibility can be preserved. Gold held directly behaves differently than gold held indirectly. This distinction has existed for centuries. It becomes more important during transitions. Transitions rarely happen overnight. They unfold through incremental changes. Each change appears manageable. Cumulatively, they reshape the landscape. The phrase seizure begins may be dramatic, but the underlying issue is gradualism. Gradualism reduces resistance. It allows adaptation. It is effective. Recognizing gradualism allows individuals to adapt proactively rather than reactively. Proactive adaptation preserves options. This is not about predicting specific actions. It is about understanding incentives. Incentives drive policy. Policy shapes frameworks. Frameworks shape outcomes. Gold's enduring value lies in its independence from promises. Preserving that independence requires awareness of how it is held. As rules evolve, those who understand structure will retain flexibility. Those who focus only on headlines will be surprised. History does not repeat perfectly, but it rhymes. Periods of fiscal stress lead to increased oversight. Increased oversight leads to reduced optionality. Reduced optionality increases the value of assets held outside constrained frameworks. The decision is not binary. It is not all or nothing. It is about balance. Balance between efficiency and autonomy, between tax advantages and control, between convenience and resilience. Gold can serve different roles simultaneously if structured intentionally. That intention must be revisited as conditions change. The coming years are likely to bring continued experimentation in financial regulation. Experimentation favors those who are informed. Informed decisions are calm decisions. Calm decisions preserve wealth better than emotional ones. Gold has survived countless rule changes, regimes, and reforms. It adapts. Those who hold it must adapt as well. The real risk is not seizure, it is complacency. Complacency assumes that structures designed for stability will behave the same under stress. Stress reveals priorities. Understanding priorities allows preparation. This discussion is not a warning of imminent action. It is a reminder that frameworks matter. Where and how assets are held matters. Gold remains gold regardless of structure, but its usefulness depends on accessibility. Accessibility is shaped by rules. Rules change. Recognizing that reality is the first step toward intelligent preparation. The goal is not fear. The goal is understanding. Understanding is the true hedge.